Dispatches investigates Cadbury's in an hour. First, though, with the time at 7 p.m, our main evening bulletin. There are strong images of the war in Ukraine from the start of Channel 4 News, which some viewers may find distressing.
A presidential visit to hell. Volodymyr Zelensky accuses Russia of genocide as he tours the ravaged Ukrainian city of Bucha. Good evening. Until a few days ago, Bucha was a town few would have been able to find on a map. Now it seems set to become a byword for Russian atrocities that have shocked the world. Apparently defenceless civilians shot dead with their hands bound behind their backs. Claims of rape and torture. Ukraine's president used a visit there to accuse Moscow of trying to eliminate his country. Joe Biden said Vladimir Putin was a war criminal who must be put on trial. The UK's Foreign Secretary heralded a tough new round of sanctions. Russia, meanwhile, reiterated its allegations without supplying evidence that the images from Bucha were faked. Peace talks continue, but how much of a chance do they really have amid evidence of almost unimaginable depravity? Tonight, we're live in Ukraine's second city, Kharkiv.
Also tonight, the world's leading climate change scientists warned it's now or never for the planet. In their latest key report on climate change, they say it's still possible to avert the worst effects of global warming, but only if the world takes action right now. We report from Peru, where the impact of rising temperatures is already causing drought and water shortages. If nothing changes, it's feared that Lima's water supply could almost run dry by 2050. And she played EastEnders Dot Cotton for more than 3 decades and produced some of the most memorable moments in British television history. June Brown has died at the age of 95.
Ukraine has accused Russia of committing genocide as President Zelensky visited the town of Bucha on the outskirts of Kyiv, scene of the shocking images of dead civilians strewn along the road, some with hands tied, gunshot wounds and signs of torture. The Ukrainian leader said the scale of the atrocities have made it difficult for him to negotiate with Russia, while there has been a growing international outcry. Britain described the attacks as barbaric, while President Biden said Vladimir Putin was a war criminal who should face trial. And just to warn you, there are extremely distressing images in Jonathan Rugman's report.
On the edge of a Ukrainian forest, an atrocity which recalls so many others in Europe and yet should shock Europe to its core. The bodies of Olha Soryenko, head of her village, together with her husband, her son and one other unidentified body. Ukrainian officials say they were taken hostage by Russian troops 10 days ago and then shot. Their graves are covered in sand and so shallow that they can scarcely be called graves at all. In the town of Bucha, the corpses were discarded like rubbish out for collection. Hundreds of them found after Russian troops withdrew at the weekend. Russians who briefly might have believed they would be greeted as liberators, but according to Western intelligence, planned to carry out executions if they weren't. This afternoon, President Zelensky visited Bucha himself, a sign of his growing confidence, but above all to bear witness.
These
are war crimes, and they will be recognized by the world as genocide. You are here today and can see what happened. We know of thousands of people killed and tortured, with severed limbs, raped women, murdered children.
The horror of what happened here is forcing a gear change in Europe's response. Even the Germans are talking about more sanctions against Russian energy, as is President Macron, who has talked to Vladimir Putin 17 times since December. And Poland's Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, is asking to what real purpose?
President Macron,
how many times have you negotiated with Putin? What have you achieved? Did you stop any of the actions which took place? Criminals are not debated or negotiated with. Criminals must be fought. Nobody negotiated with Hitler. Would you negotiate with Stalin? Would you negotiate with Pol Pot?
Negocjowalibyście ze Stalinem? Negocjowalibyście z Pol Potem?
Сегодня война против России перешла в новую фазу.
This is Vladimir Solevov, a major Russian cheerleader for what he won't call a war. On TV last night, he accused the British of dreaming up the Bucha attack, claiming that Russian troops, here seen in the southeast of Ukraine, had not been in permanent control. The Russians say not one resident was hurt, with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov calling it all fake news.
The other day, another fake attack was undertaken in the town of Bucha in the Kyiv region after the Russian military had left, according to plans and agreements. Several days later, a fake situation was staged that is now being spread through all media channels and social media by the Ukrainian representatives and their Western patrons.
This is what's left of the city of Mariupol, with large parts now as empty as Mr. Lavrov's claims that peace talks have made progress. The opinion page in a leading Russian newspaper appeared to describe Vladimir Putin's plan yesterday. It called for a total purge and the targeting of a large mass of Ukraine's population, whom it named as passive Nazis. Here too there are bodies yet to be buried, and with them a growing sense that no territorial compromise with Russia's dictator would be right or even possible. The gravediggers work in shell craters to the sound of fighting. It's easier to dig here because the earth has already been softened. A common grave, they say, for the disabled and for pensioners who couldn't escape from their homes. Yet another attempt by the Red Cross to evacuate those who have survived Russia's bombardment failed today. 130,000 people remain trapped. And as for war crimes, what has shocked so many in the last few days could be just the beginning.
Well, joining me now from Kyiv is Richard Weir from Human Rights Watch. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. I mean, these are really distressing images. I wonder what you've seen as you've travelled around this
work, and that the individuals that are responsible are held to account.
So we've heard on Russian television and also the Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, saying this was faked by the Ukrainians in order to blame us. What do you say to that?
Well, I can tell you, of course, from documenting violations committed by the Russian military in other places, that this is a tactic that they have repeatedly used. In Syria, of course, they've used videos of the wrong location to claim that they never attacked markets that killed dozens of people. And here too, this is not a situation where people are alleged to have died. There are people that are littering the streets. These are things that I myself have seen, and plenty of other individuals who have visited the city, and of course the residents have seen. We've seen the handcuffs digging into the wrists of the dead. This is not some staged event.
Richard Weir in Kyiv, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Matt. Well, Ukraine's second city of Kharkiv came under shell attack again today, killing 7 people and injuring dozens of others. It has been under constant bombardment since the war began, leaving much of the city in ruins, with residents living in basements or underground stations. From there, our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, reports.
Well, first off, so you've got time, a warning that my report tonight contains images which some of you will find disturbing right from the beginning. Another night of war here in Kharkiv, the second city of Ukraine, where the Russian army pressed far closer still than they ever did in the capital, Kyiv. Another night in which, in just one incident, a large number of people were appallingly injured and several killed. Now, it will be for any future war crimes investigators to decide whether, for instance, this incident, one of 10 scores, hundreds, thousands in this war, amounts to a war crime. But what I can tell you is that, at least on our superficial visit this morning, what we found certainly looked like the indiscriminate or deliberate attack of a civilian area. The morning after the night before, a quiet cigarette They scarcely even notice the rolling thunder of Russian multiple rocket fire. All the victims civilians, say the authorities. All the explosions in the heart of a large housing estate. This morning, the dead are gone, sand and bloodstains where they were cut down. The children's playground where they died, pockmarked with shrapnel damage.
3 explosions.
Sergei and Ksenia said there were 3 explosions in a neighborhood never targeted before. That's why we're all still here, they said.
Элементы кассетного боеприпаса.
These are the fragments of a cluster bomb. The small bits are the heating elements, the big parts are the missile case itself. Round the back from Sergei and Ksenia's place, a second impact, more shrapnel damage. I saw a mum and her daughter hit here, says Alla. The mother was wounded in her breast, the daughter in her groin, terrible wounds. The ambulance crew said they wouldn't make it, she told us. Now, we specifically checked with Sergei and Ksenia, with Alexandra, the territorial defense officer, with this soldier, and with Alla. They all said quite separately, this place, Odeska, is what this place looks like. Just a large housing estate, no military anywhere near here. They all said without hesitation. Across Kharkiv, the northern suburb of Saltivka. Bombed out canyons of ash and twisted concrete. Like Chernihiv, Mariupol, Izium, Kharkiv joins the list of housing areas across Ukraine pulverized by Putin. This is what the in tray of a war crime investigation looks like. Piecing together evidence of what certainly looks like the indiscriminate shelling of civilian areas. The mournful cooing of pigeons and the constant shelling. It is beyond belief, but some still live in Saltivka. Europe in the 21st century. This, the kitchen, where you use an electric kettle to prop up the fire. Natalia and Valentina live here, exist here.
We have nowhere to go. Where could we go? We could go to another city and then what? Today they are bombing here, tomorrow they will bomb there.
So they depend upon food parcels dropped off by volunteers running the gauntlet of the shelling to come out here.
It's how they survived the First World War, the Second World War. That's how we are surviving the Third World War.
In an area like this, it is obvious why so many people have gone and fled from this entire region. And when you talk to the mayor and you say, well, isn't it a bit like Kiev? You've pushed the Russian army back. He says no.
No, it's nothing like that here. It's shelling all the time from the Russian aggressor.
On display. As Anton and Anastasia get married. They're using the rubble for some memorable wedding photos. Then tying the knot in an underground station for safety reasons.
Раз и навсегда просто.
The couple framed by trains, now temporary homes for the thousands in this city whose real flats have been obliterated. Well, Mark, just not the words of the mayor of Kharkiv there, but the vehemence with which he said them. They're in no doubt here that the struggle they face to push back the forces of Moscow around this city is a considerably more onerous undertaking, it would appear, than even around the capital Kiev. And we've seen the appalling consequences of that around the world in recent days. There is a pullback of Russian forces. These pictures show the situation here at Sumy, that's to the north of Kharkiv, and show obviously a considerable, sizable armoured column of Russian armour moving back north into the Belarus-Russia proper area. Of course, that is a retreat in this phase of the war, but as Vladimir Putin, the Kremlin have made quite clear, it is only for redeployment, and that redeployment coming further south from here to the disputed areas of Donbass and Luhansk. Back to you.
Alex Thompson in Kharkiv. Well, across the Atlantic, President Biden has led the outspoken reaction to the harrowing scenes from Bucha. The US ambassador to the United Nations said that they would be seeking to suspend Russia from the UN Human Rights Council. Well, let's get the latest from Kate Fisher in Washington. Kate.
There's been outrage across the political spectrum here. President Joe Biden is in fact addressing reporters just the other side of the White House as we speak. He's talking about trucking, but we're waiting to see if he gives any more reaction to this. He did, as he landed here in Washington this morning, telling reporters that he wants to see a war crimes trial and urging that that evidence is collected ahead of a prosecution.
You may remember I got criticized for calling Putin a war criminal. Well, the truth of the matter, you saw what happened in Bucha. This warrants him. He is a war criminal. This guy is brutal. And what's happening in Bucha is outrageous. And everyone's seen it. Up to Allah. No, I think it is a war crime.
It's hard to hear just at the end of that, but he's being asked if he believes what's happening is genocide. He says no, disagreeing with what Volodymyr Zelensky said over the weekend. Nonetheless, he has promised more sanctions and more weapons. I spent some time earlier on Capitol Hill speaking to senior lawmakers here, senators, and they were in rare agreement, which doesn't happen a lot in Washington these days, saying that they believe the US still needs to do more. The first one I spoke to, Lindsey Graham, a strong ally of former President Donald Trump and seemingly a big fan of the way Prime Minister Boris Johnson is handling this. Senator Graham, Channel 4 News. Is the US doing enough in Ukraine?
No.
Is President Biden's handling of this? What should he be doing?
We should be giving fighter planes and tanks to go on the offensive. They're actually taking territory back. If they had more capability, they could take more territory back. There are still loopholes in the sanctions. Our European partners are doing more, but we're still buying way too much oil and gas. Crush all the banks.
How did you feel seeing the pictures we've seen over the weekend?
It's a turning point in the war. Putin's putting in play everything we believe. He's defying world order as it exists post-World War II. It's a war crime on steroids. You're Channel 4?
Channel 4 News UK.
Let me tell you, Boris Johnson, of all the people, NATO leadership has risen to the occasion. I think he has shown us the way to deal with this. Call Putin out for who he is and be more aggressive.
Do you think President Biden should take some tips from him?
Yes.
Should the US be doing more militarily?
Very definitely. I've advocated for months that we provide more military support, the missiles, the anti-aircraft batteries, all of the air defense that Ukraine needs to stop the reign of terror from the skies.
And I firmly believe that we should do everything and anything that's possible. I don't think that we want to give every detail of what we're doing.
Thank goodness Ukrainian people are standing up and we're standing behind them. We need to provide them the resources they need to establish their leadership in their homeland.
More sanctions, harder sanctions, wider sanctions?
Sign me up for all the above. I'm sorry, it's reached a point where we've got to stop this madness. There are too many innocent people dying.
Well, as pressure grows to help those innocent people, those questions to President Biden are only going to get tougher. He is still addressing the truckers just behind us. I'm sure he will be asked by reporters if he has anything more to say. It's still early in the day here, and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will be addressing reporters in about 25 minutes' time here at the White House. No doubt more to come from Washington on what to make of the scenes in Ukraine over the weekend.
Kate Fisher, thank you very much indeed, and well done getting all those US senators. Not an easy thing to do. Well, earlier I spoke to Zhana Nemtsova. Her late father, Boris Nemtsov, was an outspoken critic of Vladimir Putin and of Russia's intervention in Ukraine. He was shot dead on a bridge near the Kremlin in February 2015, and an investigation found that he'd been shadowed by an agent linked to a political assassination team for a year before he was killed. I started by asking her if her father was still alive today, what would he be doing?
If my father were alive today, he would have been helping Ukraine, I assume, because my father was one of the few Russian politicians who was always on the Ukrainian side, and he was a very outspoken critic of the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and he organized anti-war protests in Moscow, and he was killed on the 27th of February 2015, just few days ahead of the protest, of the anti-war protest he actually was organizing.
There's been new evidence uncovered, Zhana Nemtsova, about an FSB death squad, if you like, certainly one person following him around the country for over a year. Who do you think ordered your father's killing?
This new revelation suggests that Putin was personally interested in my father's assassination, and taking into account the invasion of Ukraine, I have little doubt about the role of Putin. I think that he ordered the killing of my father.
When you see the horrific images coming out of Kyiv, the suburbs of Kyiv, places like Bucha, where the Russian forces have now left, you see civilian bodies lying on the streets. Are you in any doubt whether Vladimir Putin is a war criminal?
No, I have no doubt. He is a war criminal, but all people who committed those morally reprehensible crimes are also war criminals. There are a lot of people involved in that. Those people who now work for the Russian government, those commanders, soldiers, all people who were engaged in this bloody massacre are responsible and should be held responsible and should be brought to justice, absolutely. But one more thing that I want to say is that after those horrific images, I think that all Russians have responsibility. And even me, I think I feel myself responsible for that. And we as Russians have to do something for Ukrainians. We have to help them in any way we can.
And Jana, do you think that ordinary Russians, who of course are living in a country where they can't get access to free media, do you think that they believe what the government tells them? Or do you think they actually see that there's another truth out there that they don't get access to?
Well, first of all, yes, all major media outlets are blocked in Russia, you're absolutely right. And not only media outlets, but major social networks like Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram. But you can install VPN, you can have access. If you want to know, you will know. I think that a lot of Russians do not want to know the truth. They do not to look into the face of those horrible crimes that are being committed in Ukraine. And they do not want to admit their responsibility. But they will have to do that at some point of time. I would like to refer to my father's quote, who said, "Only Russians can oust Putin from power."
Right, but at the moment there don't seem to be any Russians prepared to do so, either on the street, despite some very courageous people getting arrested, but the numbers aren't there, are they? or indeed in the inner circles of power?
Well, you're right. It requires time, but I think that those severe sanctions which were imposed by the West will not remove Putin from power, though I'm not against the sanctions, of course. But still, if you want to live in a normal country, you have to act. And I agree with many Ukrainian politicians who say those things to Russians. You have to take the responsibility. You have to fight for your freedom. You have to fight for your democracy. And you have to understand why democracy is important. And I think that people at some point of time will understand that.
Jana Nemtsova, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
It is now or never. That's the stark warning from the world's leading climate scientists as the latest stage of the IPCC climate report from the UN was published. Emissions rose last year by the highest amount ever recorded, despite the rapidly closing window to avert a climate catastrophe. But today's report offers some hope. The world has the tools and technology to make rapid change, but it has to start now, as Minnie Stevenson reports.
Mother Nature has sent the world many warnings. Its signals are increasingly loud. Some have been lethal. But are we listening? Today, the world's leading scientists issued an urgent warning. In their words, it's now or never. Climate change is moving faster than we are, and we must act. The science is crystal clear. It's game over for all fossil fuels.
The jury has reached a verdict, and it is damning. This report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a litany of broken climate promises. It is a file of shame, cataloguing the empty pledges that put us firmly on track towards an unlivable world. We are on a fast track to climate disaster.
The report today warns that emissions, which are still rising, must fall by a huge 43% by the end of this decade if we are to meet the Paris Agreement aim of keeping warming below 1.5 degrees alive. Miss that deadline and scientists warn climate breakdown may spiral out of control. We already have the tools to get there, they say. We just need to roll them out quicker. Renewables like wind, solar and batteries are now in many cases cheaper than fossil fuel alternatives and have fallen in cost by 85% since 2010, says the report. And for many Western governments, the war in Ukraine and spiralling energy costs have given extra urgency to shift oil and gas. Energy is now seen as a national security issue, and the crisis in the cost of living in many countries is forcing politicians to have a rethink. Here the government is planning to dramatically scale up wind and nuclear power with the long-delayed energy security strategy due to be announced soon.
Today's report comes at a time of global turbulence. Inequalities are at unprecedented levels. The recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic is scandalously uneven. Inflation is rising, and the war in Ukraine is causing food and energy prices to skyrocket. But increasing fossil fuel production will only make matters worse.
While there are many worthy distractions on the world stage right now, humanity is heading for a point of no return, and scientists say we're running out of road to avert a climate disaster.
Well, earlier I spoke to the COP26 president, Alok Sharma, and I began by asking him whether Russia's war had thrown plans to fix the climate off course.
Russia's illegal and brutal invasion of Ukraine is front and foremost of everyone's mind. And of course, we've seen these appalling images that have been emerging from Ukraine, from Kyiv, and obviously our hearts go out to the people of Ukraine. So obviously this is front and center, and the threat of climate change hasn't gone away. And this report that's come out from the IPCC highlights that actually the window to keep 1.5 alive is closing alarmingly fast, and countries need to act.
But the problem is that with Russia's war, there's a scramble now to lay our hands on alternative sources of energy, and that's leading to more pressing political concerns. And you've seen that around your own cabinet table with Jacob Rees-Mogg saying we've got to get every last drop out of the North Sea. Is he wrong?
What is absolutely clear is that countries are looking to see what they can do in terms of meeting their immediate needs when it comes to energy. But it's also the case that what you're hearing from countries is a recognition of the need to advance and accelerate the renewables capacity that they have. I mean, if you look at the UK, one of the reasons that we are not dependent on Russian hydrocarbons is because we've built one of the biggest offshore wind sectors in the world.
But do you want to get every last drop out of the North Sea, as Jacob Rees-Mogg does?
Cathy, what I'd say to you is that, I mean, my job as COP president has been to build consensus around the world on these issues.
But you can't build consensus around your own cabinet table.
Well, the government will be setting out its energy strategy very shortly, and I think I'm very happy to come back on and talk about the details of that, but I'm not going to sort of preempt any of that. What I'm saying to you is look at what the UK has achieved. Since the year 2000, we've decarbonised our economy faster than any other G20 nation. We've built the second biggest offshore wind sector in the world. We have legislated to have net zero by 2050 in our economy, and just look at the progress we've made.
But your own climate change committee says that you're not on track to meet your targets.
Cathy, I don't think anyone can say that the UK is not a leader in this. I mean, I have obviously in this role met world leaders, ministers around the world, and they very much see the UK as a leader when it comes to climate action.
But the UK is also not on track to meet its net zero targets.
Well, as I said to you, we have exceeded carbon budgets 1 and 2. We are on track on carbon budget 3.
But from 2023 onwards, you're off track. Your own climate change committee says that. I just checked before this interview.
Yeah. But Cathy, we've not got to that point yet. And obviously, we set out our net zero strategy at the end of last year, which sets out, and actually the Committee on Climate Change appraised it and said this was something that other countries should look at as well.
You've talked about the need for renewables. Boris Johnson will set out his energy strategy later this week. I don't expect you to spill the beans on that, but he's reportedly gone cold on onshore wind. Are you worried about that?
Well, Cathy, as you rightly say, I'm not going to speculate on what's going to be in that strategy. The Prime Minister will, as you said, set that out.
But is onshore wind a crucial part of the energy strategy?
Renewables and clean energy are very much part of where we are going in terms
but not
of
necessarily onshore wind.
And well, I would just say to you, in terms of onshore wind, I think around 25% of all installed renewables capacity currently is onshore. But let's just wait and see what the strategy says. And as I said, I'm happy to come back on and have a chat about it.
Would you be happy to have an onshore wind farm in your own constituency?
Yes, I would.
Do you think other cabinet ministers might not be?
Well, I can't comment for anybody else. But
well, sell it to them.
The key thing, Cathy, is that we're going to be setting out, as you say, our energy strategy very shortly, and you will see the details of what we intend to do in that.
Well, the consequences of drought caused by global warming are only too evident in Peru, where melting glaciers mean the water which used to supply local communities is drying up fast. And it's already affecting major cities too. It's feared that unless there's immediate action to curb temperature rises, the water supply in the capital, Lima, could pretty much run out by 2050. Our Latin America correspondent Guillermo Galdos now reports.
High up in the Peruvian Andes, La Cordillera Blanca, the White Mountains, are not as white as they used to be. 70% of the world's tropical glaciers are here among these peaks, but they are melting at an alarming rate.
Todo eso de acá era hielo. Todo esto era parte, digamos, de las rutas de esquí.
Luzmila Dávila is a glaciologist who has been measuring the loss of ice here. In the past 2 decades, around a third of these glaciers has melted away.
Esa pérdida se está traduciendo a 21 metros por año. Entonces,
o sea, en pocos años ya no va a haber esto.
Por supuesto.
En 20 años o menos.
En 20 años o menos, ese glaciar va a desaparecer.
The melting is mainly caused by rising temperatures due to climate change. But Luzmila shows me other evidence that human industry is to blame.
¿Y qué es eso negro que vemos ahí?
Esos negros son las partículas de hollín que llegan transportadas por el viento y que se depositan en los glaciares y luego funden el hielo.
The ice is melting at such an incredible rate that people come here to see it for themselves.
It's amazing to see the amount of people here. They are climate change tourists. This massive block of ice is melting really fast, and it will probably won't be here in a couple of years. The problem will be for the communities down below the valleys and in the Peruvian coast, that they live from the water that melts from these glaciers.
As a steady flow of water washed through this formerly arid land, it caused a farming boom which sustained thousands of livelihoods. But that is now under serious threat. Roberto Balabarca is the president of this small farming community.
Antes era cristalino, era cristalino, había truchas, todo, ¿no?
It's incredible. He says that they used to drink this water, but not anymore because the glacier up there is gone. And now when it rains, the rain washes all the minerals from the bare rock at the top of the mountains, and the river comes with this color, orange.
Ya malora este agua, ya no es ya está bueno para consumir porque ya te tiñes de esta manera, te tiñe, te pinta, ¿no?
¿Qué le dirías tú a los países contaminantes, a los que han causado que el hielo se derrita lo rápido que se ha derretido?
Nosotros quisiéramos que se ponga mano al corazón esos países, realmente que nosotros hemos sido afectados con la naturaleza, por el mismo campo de zona, por las tantas fábricas que hay afuera, que lleva la contaminación.
Peru is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change. Hundreds of thousands of climate migrants have already moved from rural areas to cities, looking for safety and a way to make a living. José Carpio now lives with his family on the outskirts of the capital, Lima. He left his farmland in the mountains when the water became unusable and the climate unbearable.
Yo me vine acá a Lima por motivo de cambio climatológico. ¿Ya? ¿Por qué? Bueno, porque el agua ya no era lo mismo, se secaba el agua, todo por ese motivo. ¿Qué pasa cuando uno no llueve allá? Los cultivos crecen, una vez que llueve, no hay agua, ¿qué hacen? Se empiezan a secar, empieza a un calor inmenso y con eso prácticamente lo mata todo.
It almost never rains in Lima, and the huge influx of people means water is scarce here too. José has to walk up and down this hill all day to get what little is available. It's predicted that by 2050, Lima's water supply will be close to running dry. As always, the poorest families will be the hardest hit, and people like José will have to find somewhere else to go to survive. The question is, where?
Guillermo Galdos reporting there. Well, the lead author of the IPCC's last assessment in 2014 was Professor John Barrett from the University of Leeds, and he joins me now. Professor, there was some pretty alarming language used by the UN Secretary-General today. Is that justified from a scientific point of view?
Yes, well, the report shows that now global greenhouse gas emissions are at their highest level in all of human history, that despite considerable climate action over the last 10 years, they've actually grown by another 12% over that time period, and that by 2030 we need to reduce global emissions by 43%. So this is really stark, and I think that the language used is robust, but it is supported by the science.
Well, so when Alok Sharma says that the UK is leading the world on this, despite the fact that their own climate change committee says they're off track from next year, is he right that the UK is really doing better than a lot of the rest of the world?
It's doing better than some, but it's all relative. No one's doing enough, and the UK isn't doing enough. As you mentioned, the Climate Change Committee, that is sort of there to scrutinise, in a way, the government, says they're not doing enough. And so it's all pretty clear that they're not. We've been very good at setting climate targets in the UK, but not really backing that up with all the policies and strategies which we need to help meet those targets. So no, we're not.
Well, so let's look at some of those policies and strategies then. New North Sea oil and gas projects, one approved in February, some more coming down the pipeline, a new coal mine being considered. Is there any justification for that?
From the science, there's absolutely no justification at all. One thing the report showed was that if we use all our fossil fuel infrastructure that's in place for the intended life that we hoped we would, we will exceed our global climate ambitions. We have to retire fossil fuel infrastructure early, not extend its use. So any policy which seeks to, in essence, increase the extraction of fossil fuels is completely counter to the science of climate change.
But obviously it's not counter to the politics. You've got consumers struggling with rising energy bills, exacerbated by Russia's war. So from a political perspective, it's completely understandable, isn't it, to get every last drop out of the North Sea, as Jacob Rees-Mogg put it today?
I would say no, because there are cheaper options and we can expand renewables at great speed. We could also ensure that we have policies which don't hit households as hard as they do. And there are many policies, such as making houses more efficient, will actually reduce bills for people. There are ways which we can actually align the well-being of people with climate policy.
Well, you talk about extending renewables, expanding renewables at great speed, but it takes a while to do an onshore wind farm, doesn't it? Boris Johnson talking about putting a more emphasis on nuclear instead. What's the sort of most sensible approach in your view?
Yeah, well, onshore wind is cheaper. We've seen huge reductions, and the report shows this. We've had an 85% reduction in the cost of solar in the last 10 years, 55% reduction in wind. It is a cheap form of energy that we need to use. And what the report also shows is that we have many ways that we can change the way that we use energy, and those collectively could bring around a 40 to 70% reduction in our emissions if we focus on energy demand.
Right. Professor John Barrett, thank you very much for joining us. Matt.
Now, with COVID rates in England at a record level, another 9 symptoms have been added to the official list, including shortness of breath, tiredness and a sore throat. COVID-related absences are causing havoc in some businesses, including airlines, which have been forced to cancel dozens of flights. Our health and social care editor, Victoria MacDonald, has more. Victoria.
Yes, there has been some lobbying for some time to have the list expanded. It had happened at the World Health Organization, at the CDC in America, but for some reason the UK Health Security Agency didn't want to right up until now. So as you said, there are 9 new symptoms added to the continuous cough, the fever and the loss of taste and smell, and these do include the ones you've mentioned, as well as things like diarrhea and feeling sick and a headache, sore throat, stuffy nose, which of course could also be a cold. The Zoe COVID app people had been pressing for this for nearly 2 years. Now this is self-reporting, and they knew what those with COVID were saying was not necessarily the 3 main symptoms we'd come to know and absolutely loathe. This is also at the time when you now have to pay for your COVID test, so this is also asking the public to be extra vigilant when they're beginning to feel unwell. And then you said there, Matt, of course, that the rates are at record levels still, and this is having a knock-on effect. Both EasyJet and British Airways today cancelled flights as holidaymakers were leaving for Easter, partly because, they said, of COVID staff sickness.
Victoria, thanks very much. Now, the Court of Appeal in London has begun considering whether to hear a £5 billion lawsuit against the Anglo-Australian mining company BHP over the Mariana Dam disaster in Brazil in 2015. 19 people were killed and dozens of communities were affected by the toxic waste which was released into the River Doce, destroying wildlife, fish and farmland as it contaminated everything in its path. Fatima Manji reports.
An anthem for justice composed in southeast Brazil, sung in the law courts of London. These members of the Krenak indigenous community are taking on Anglo-Australian mining giant BHP.
We're here because these mining companies come into our lives and took the father of our people, our river. The mining waste destroyed our people's lives.
In 2015, the collapse of a dam unleashed 44 million cubic metres of mining waste into the River Doce. The Krenec community live along its banks. It was Brazil's worst ever environmental disaster. The toxic flood washed out homes and obliterated entire villages. 19 people were killed, and the polluted water ran into the Atlantic Ocean.
The water in this bottle represents the River Doce today, what the mining company did to our river.
More than 200,000 claimants from Brazil affected by the Mariana Dam disaster are now seeking £5 billion in compensation here in London at the Court of Appeal. It's an unusual case that could set a significant precedent. At this stage, though, it's just about considering whether the case can be heard here in London and not about the allegations itself.
This could be one of the largest ever group actions held in the courts of England in all time. A foreign company like BHP, which caused deaths in Brazil, unrestrained environmental devastation, we believe they ought to be, and my clients believe they ought to be held accountable in an English court.
BHP declined to be interviewed. In a statement, they told us they're fully committed to doing the right thing for those affected. They say they've paid nearly £1.5 billion in compensation and will have paid £4.5 billion by the end of this year. They also believe Brazil is the right place for any legal proceedings. Those whose homes have been destroyed feel very differently.
The justice in Brazil is not enough. There have been several people who have died, 600 kilometers of destroyed nature in Brazil. The justice system is connected to big capital.
The case will be heard until Friday.
Fatima Manji reporting. Well, while we've been on air, the government has confirmed that Channel 4 will be sold off, according to a statement by the channel. It's reported that bids will be invited from the spring of 2023, with a view to the sale happening by the time of the next general election. A government source told the Telegraph newspaper it wanted to ensure that the channel had the long-term funding it needed to modernise.
After the break, the much-loved EastEnders star June Brown has died at 95. As the chain-smoking, scandal-spreading Dot Cotton, she was one of Britain's longest-running characters and created some of the soap's most iconic moments.
Bring back the wow with Karcher pressure washers.
AJ Bell is on a mission to make investing easier. Take Ben. He's making investments over breakfast. And Claire's money definitely works harder than she does. For DIY investors, Carol, Jamal and Toby, it's all about our market insights. While Zoe leaves it to her independent financial advisor. Those tomatoes aren't going to look after themselves now, are they? Despite what he tells his mates, VJ is a proper novice, so chose our ready-made portfolios. Alice has never invested before, but is now closer to buying her first home, thankfully. And Deborah is set to retire with plans of a yoga retreat, which is news to Dave. Sorry, mate. This is Investing for All. AJ Bell.
Children affected by the conflict in Ukraine urgently need our help. Conflict is putting millions of children and their families in immediate danger. You've seen the awful scenes on the news. Families are desperately seeking shelter and safety. UNICEF is delivering essential supplies to protect children in Ukraine. Search UNICEF Ukraine online or text PROTECT to 85525 to find out how you can help. UNICEF is working around the clock to keep children safe. We will keep doing that for as long as they need us, but we need your help to ramp up our effort. £27 could help us provide an emergency shelter for one family, helping to protect children and keep them safe from the cold. Search UNICEF Ukraine online or text PROTECT to 85525. Help us show families affected by this terrible conflict that they are not alone.
Hi, Ashley!
Hi, Joel!
You look
look like a handsome Quasimodo.
It's been said before.
Brand new travel man Joe Lycett is joined by his fave celebrity chums for a mini break they'll never forget.
There's poo, there's rats and spiders. Thank you for bringing me here.
Cheers, mate.
All new Travel Man starts tonight at 8:30 on Channel 4. All episodes available after on all 4.
With Easter around the corner, Britain's favourite chocolate brand is gearing up for some bumper sales. But is Cadbury's chocolate really as ethical as they say it is? And is child labour involved in their supply chain? Dispatches unwraps the truth. Cadbury Exposed, tonight at 8 on Channel 4 and all 4.
Welcome back. June Brown, better known as Dot Cotton, the chain-smoking doyenne of EastEnders Albert Square, has died at the age of 95. She played the role for more than 30 years, making her one of the longest-running soap stars on British television. A spokesperson for the show said that her loving warmth, wit and great humour would never be forgotten. Simeon Brown reports.
On my way home, I drank from a stream. Water was so cold, it hurt me head. It was the best day.
June Brown played the nation's favourite chain-smoking great-aunt and laundrette assistant for over 30 years, here on the BBC's flagship soap opera, EastEnders.
Would you like a song, little pearl? Because that's what he called me.
For many, it's hard to know where Dot Cotton ends and June Brown begins. Yet the actor always said the only similarity shared between the two was their faith, that was tested and challenged by modernity explored on the show.
Are you trying to tell me that you and Colin sleep in the same sheets? At the same time? In the same bed?
There's no law against it, is there? At least not after next week. It's when I come of age.
Oh, Barry.
Her hysterical reactions, and comedic, but hysterical and always in character, I think in a way took the country on a journey. They learnt about gay men, and so she, in a strange way, she became a part of this country's development into a much more liberal and accepting society.
From homophobia,
Sure, didn't you know?
No, I certainly did not.
elder abuse,
And if I told the truth, they'd lock you up, Ma.
to euthanasia.
I don't want to ask you. I never have, but help me, Dot. Before it's too late.
This was one of the most significant moments in soap opera history.
Is this what you really want? Yes.
And June Brown was one of its most decorated stars. She won multiple British Soap Awards and was awarded an OBE for services to drama. June Brown's career started on stage. She trained at the Old Vic and had said in life she only wanted to act. June was also made a widow in life twice and a mother of 6.
Mrs. Cott.
Yes?
Dorothy.
Yes, I know my name, thank you.
At 95 years old, the character artist who made one of TV's greatest soap characters her own has now made her final exit.
The legendary Dot Cotton. A reminder of tonight's main news. The Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of carrying out genocide and war crimes as he visited the town of Bucha outside Kiev. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said the evidence of civilian killings there was just the tip of the iceberg and called for the most severe sanctions to be imposed on Russia. Well, that's all from us tonight. From all of us here in Leeds and Matt in London, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.